Jim runs 6 miles in 44 minutes. At the same rate, how many minutes would he take to run 9 miles? And the reason, this is the clues that I get that I know we're dealing with a proportion problem, is the fact that we have here, you know, he's running 6 miles, 44 minutes. So we're talking about minutes and miles. And then looking at here, in the same rate, how many minutes in order to run 9 miles? We're dealing with the same variables, miles and minutes, miles and minutes. And when they say the same rate, that lets me know that it's a proportion like this, 2 equal fractions. So I'm going to set it up just like that. So I'm going to do, and I'm going to label it first, miles and minutes. So we just create a ratio. It doesn't matter which way you set it up as long as the fractions match up. So I'll do miles and minutes. And when I say it doesn't matter which way you set it up, meaning I could also set it up like this. Minutes over miles, minutes over miles. As long as the numerators match and the denominators match, doesn't matter. In other words, you don't want it to have like this, minutes over miles equals miles over minutes. That will be incorrect. So be careful on your setup. So either one is acceptable as long as the top numbers match and the bottom numbers, like what you're measuring it with, they match up. So I'm just going to set it up with the first one. And you can see here that 6 miles. So when it runs 6 miles, it took them 44 minutes. And then they're saying at the same rate, how many minutes? So the unknown is the minutes. That's my x. So I'm going to call the bottom one here minutes, miles. The bottom one minutes is going to be x. And then the miles is 9. So notice that the pairs have to be together. So 6 miles, 44 minutes has to be one fraction. The other fraction is the other information you were given. 9 miles, how many minutes? And if you notice here, my variables in my denominator, I don't really like setting it up that way, because I like to use equivalent fractions to solve this. So I'm going to set it up this way over here. So I'm going to put the minutes up top, miles at the bottom. So 44 minutes, 6 miles. How many minutes to run 9 miles? So I set it up this way because I can use the idea of equivalent fractions to solve it. So I look at my denominator, 6 and 9. The least common denominator will be 18. So I'm going to multiply both of these by 2. And then both of these by 3. And you can see here when I simplify the numerator on the left side, I'm going to get 132 over 18 when I multiply the denominators, or simplify the denominator. And on the right side I get 2x over 18 when I simplify that. Next, I can see here that, again, so we're dealing with equivalent fractions, meaning you can see the denominators match up. And if that's true, the numerators have to match up too, which means I could write a new equation saying that 132 has to be equal to 2x if in fact those two fractions are going to be equal to each other. And now to solve it, I'm just going to divide both sides by 2. And I get x equals half of 132. Which simplifies to 66. And that's all there is to solving this proportion. Let's look at one more example. The reason why I'm bringing up this example is because the numbers are bigger, so it's harder to find a common denominator, similar to what I did in the other problem. But I'm going to show you pretty much, it's the same idea still. In this example, you can see that a machine produces 312 bolts in 30 minutes. And then we're also told that at the same rate, so we're talking about the same rate. So again, now I know that this is a clue that we're dealing with a proportion. Same rate, how many minutes, so how many minutes, I don't know, that's the unknown, would it take to produce 260 bolts? So in green I highlighted the pair of information that goes together, 312 bolts in 30 minutes. And then you can see in the pink, how many minutes for 260 bolts. So that's going to be my proportion setup. So I'm going to make 2 equal fractions, and we're talking about bolts. So I'll put bolts and minutes for my setup here. And next step, I'm just going to substitute the given information. So 312 bolts in 30 minutes. And it says here at the same rate, how many minutes? So the minutes is the unknown, so I'll call that one x. Minutes are on the bottom. What would it take to produce 260 bolts? So that's the setup for this one here. And again, if my denominator has the variable, I'm going to rewrite it. So I'm going to flip each fraction, the reciprocal of each fraction, and it's still going to be the same thing. So 30 over 312 equals x over 260. That's going to be my setup. In other words, you can see that I have the minutes up top and then the bolts on the bottom. So that's my proportion. I'm using this setup instead because I want the unknown on top. Again, you don't have to, but this is the method I'm doing because I'm using equivalent fractions. Now, in this case, if your denominators are really big like this, you don't want to spend too much time trying to find the least common denominator. We just want a common denominator. And in a fast way to do that is just multiply the 260 on the right side by 312. And I'll do the same to the numerator. And on the left side, I'll multiply this one by 260. So I'll basically use the number from the other side. And now you'll see when I simplify it, 260 times 30. So I'm going to multiply that in my calculator. 260 times 30, I get 7,800. So 7,800 divided by, and then 260 times 312, that gives me 81,120. So 81,120. And then on the right side, I get 312x divided by the same thing because we're multiplying the same numbers, 81,120. And now you can see here that my denominators match up. It's the same thing. And if that's true, then I know that my numerators up top, the numerators, these two have to be equal to each other. Again, if two fractions are equal, which is what we have in a proportion, the bottom numbers have to match when you write them out as an equivalent fraction, and so does the top. So that means the top numbers have to equal. So that's my new equation. It's going to be 7,800 is equal to 312x. And now to solve this, I just got to divide both sides by 312. So the division property of equality. And when I simplify, I'm going to get 1x on the right. And on the left side, I'm going to divide it out. I get 7,800 divided by 312. And I can see I get 25 for my final answer. And that's it. That's all you got to do to solve this proportion.